Welcome to the Lexington Public Library's Tales from the Kentucky Room podcast, where we discuss everything Lexington and Fayette County history. I'm Mariam, and in each episode of this podcast, we will feature a guest that will share a piece of local history. So thank you for tuning in and enjoy. At the time we recorded this podcast, it would be about 2 weeks since a deadly string of tornadoes hit western Kentucky. On the evening of Friday, December 10th, and into the early hours of Saturday, this storm would leave a path of destruction in the city of Mayfield, Kentucky, and the surrounding areas. Cleanup efforts are still ongoing, and the loss of lives reached 76 people. It is an event that will change the lives of many families and displace people from their land. An unfortunate coincidence with this particular podcast episode. Today on the podcast, we welcome Kentucky author Jayne Moore Waldrop. She is the author of Retracing My Steps, a finalist in the New Women's Voices chapbook series, and Pandemic Lent, a season in poems. Her most recent work tells the story of the families and individuals that were displaced by the mid-20th century federal project of the damming up of Cumberland and Tennessee rivers. This project would result in the creation of what we know of today as land between the lakes. The two lakes, Kentucky Lake and Lake Barkley, surround the beautiful National Recreation Park for the enjoyment of millions of people, but their creation buried towns and communities long since forgotten. And that is the backdrop of Waldrop's first fiction work, Drowned Town. Thank you so much for joining us, Jayne, for this podcast. So before we start on what I had planned, this book is very serendipitous as to what's happening in Western Kentucky right now. You know, it hasn't been too long since the tornadoes hit in Western Kentucky.
Right.
And your book is about that area. Can you talk to us a little bit about what recent events have, I guess, spoken to the book, or the book has spoken to, what's happening now?
Right. Since I grew up in Western Kentucky and we still have family there, in fact, my husband is from Mayfield and his family's still in Mayfield. So this has been a really tragic event. The Western Kentucky looks very different than it did even 2 weeks ago. And my book, Drowned Town, is about places that are lost in quite different ways. I mean, this was a natural disaster with the tornadoes. But Drowned Town is about those lost places that were taken when Kentucky Lake, Lake Barkley, and Land Between the Lakes were created. So the geography and landscape of Western Kentucky changed a lot in the 20th century with these signs of progress in many ways with the dams and rural electrification and all of those progressive events. But I do worry that Western Kentucky has suffered a major change again, a major environmental change, a change in its landscape. And I think it will be years for it to recover. We were down there last weekend. We were down in Mayfield, and we also stopped by Land Between the Lakes, which was also hit by the tornado. And the loss of property and home and place, and also the loss of trees was so noticeable, especially in Land Between the Lakes, but also in the city landscapes in Mayfield, and I'm sure Dawson Springs and Bremen and Casey and all these towns that were devastated by the tornadoes. Things are going to look different for a long time. And I think there is certainly the will and the strength and the support from the rest of Kentucky and the rest of the country to support that as it is reclaimed and rebuilt.
Yeah, definitely. So you said that your family is from Western Kentucky.
Okay.
Give us a little bit of background about you. I know that you are a lawyer by trade.
I am.
How did you start writing?
I grew up in Paducah. I was born and raised in Paducah. My family, though, is from Eastern Kentucky, so they were displaced Appalachians. They left Eastern Kentucky during another economic downturn in the coal industry and decided, and for other personal reasons, just decided to strike out and go to Western Kentucky. So many Appalachians did that after World War II, and So many of them went north, though, to Michigan or Ohio. There are a lot of displaced Appalachians in the north who more industrial settings. But my family went to Western Kentucky. So that's another reason I'd identify with the people who were displaced by the projects or the lakes, the dams, and Land Between the Lakes. I think there's a yearning for home when you are a displaced person, and there's a longing. And I saw that in my parents. They never they built a good life in Paducah and never returned to live in Eastern Kentucky. But there was still that feeling that home is this other place, there's sort of a disconnect, and also just that love of from young memories of being in the mountains.
As a child of immigrants, I see that yearning in my parents' eyes as well. For my family, for political reasons, they moved to America, and I saw that a lot. They were able to go back home just recently, and there's still that yearning because that return is different. You're returning to a completely different landscape, a completely different
Yes.
dynamic. There's still that yearning.
I saw that in my parents also. They would return, and it was so different that they were outsiders there when they went back because of the changes that they had experienced and a new life that they had built.
Yeah, and you see that in Cam, your main character in this book, when she describes her parents. The premise is that they go back to their hometown when Cam decides to get married in her
Mhm.
hometown. But, and it's a reflection on the past. So the book, of course, is about Cam's wedding and how all these people kind of get together in this one place that kind of connects them, but they all have different reactions and different stories and different experiences around Land Between the Lakes.
I wanted to show that lots of different perspectives because, there's no one story when people are displaced. And so I wanted to show lots of different viewpoints. And that's one of the reasons I have several different characters telling this story.
Yeah. So who inspired Cam in your
Well, that's
life?
an interesting question. She's sort of an amalgam of, many good friends I've had in my life, and what you value in a friendship. She and Margaret are sort of opposites. Margaret is definitely the anti-hero. She goes through her own evolutions and changes and transformations. She and Cam have sort of a yin and yang kind of friendship, as though opposites attract. And Cam is a very genuine, down to earth person, and who loves nature, who loves being outdoors. Just a complete lack of pretense in this character. And but she also, she's no lightweight. She tells Margaret what she needs to tell her. She's not, it's a real friendship, and it's a back and forth that, I have one especially good friend in my life that I've been friends with her since college. And I'm not saying either of us are, Cam or Margaret. It's not necessarily autobiographical, but there's a yin and yang. We bring different traits to the table, and it's through this friendship that I think through relationships we sort of figure out who we are.
Exactly, exactly. It's not just the place that we're
Yes.
in. I actually want to read a little excerpt from the book that kind of really touched me, and I really think that it encompasses what your book is about. And it's when Margaret kind of has an introspection about Land Between the Lakes and how she reacted to it. So on page 40, it was hard on people around here. Some never got over it, Lowell said. Margaret wondered if the Weatherfords had. For years, Margaret would listen to their stories, but she never understood the depth of their bitterness. She viewed the area with the eyes of a weekend visitor who arrived long after the dams were built. The towns were flooded, and the last resident moved out to make way for LBL, as they all now called Land Between the Lakes. As a tourist, she didn't have to see beyond the scenery. After the government had decided what was needed in western Kentucky and Tennessee, Margaret and others like her became beneficiaries of the actions. She swam in the lakes and biked the LBL trails without much reflection on who had been there before or what was sacrificed to provide this place for her, the weekend visitor. Privately, she applied the successive decisions designed to transform the area into a destination, but she never told the Weatherfords how she felt. She didn't want to insult the people who had hosted her, accepted her, treated her like a daughter. She loved them so much so that her younger self wondered if she should take up their bitterness and carry it as a sign of her loyalty to them. She had tried, and she found she couldn't sustain any meaningful level of regret that the lakes had been created. In its current form, the area was interwoven with her dearest memories, including Robert. He had loved it too. And I read this because I had visited Land Between the Lakes with my children the year before the pandemic hit, and we loved it. And we decided that this is definitely a place that we would want to return, not knowing the history of Land Between the Lakes until I read your book. And so, like, it's been such a benefit to a lot of Kentuckians. It's a go-to place when you want a staycation, and it's a really fun place, but it came at a high price that
Did.
I think a lot of people don't realize. It took away the homes of people. People had to move and kind of make home at another place that was foreign to them.
Right, and most people didn't move that far. The diaspora wasn't that far for most of them. They stayed in the region, but it was a high price for them. Many of their families had been on their property for a couple hundred of years. So that's a big price. Of course, they can return there, unlike the people whose homes were flooded by the lakes. Those places are, irretrievably lost. But I think it was a high price, and I also think that, not that many people understand that know that history of Western Kentucky, and as people get older, the ones who actually were moved out, forced out, as they get older and are passing, I think it's important to acknowledge this history and acknowledge that loss.
Yeah, definitely. And your book is also written from a multi perspective point of view from several
Mhm.
different characters with a unique experience that is linked to this one event. So, why was it important for you to show the different reactions to this one event?
Well, I think there are some excellent histories of what happened in Western Kentucky. I didn't really want to tell just a historical piece, and that's one of the reasons I decided to go with historical fiction, so that I could envision the emotional impact for these characters. And I wanted to tell it from a lot of different perspectives because many different types of people were impacted by these changes. As you know, there is a prisoner in the Kentucky State Penitentiary who's watching the water as it comes up after the dam was completed. There is a land appraiser who realizes that in appraising property and appraising home places that had been in families for generations, that it was more than just the objective facts and figures that he was used to dealing with. And that was a realization for him.
Yeah, interestingly, that particular character reminded me. My father worked for the USDA, and he used to inspect people's trees down in Florida when he worked where he worked. And so, if somebody had an orange tree, for example, that was diseased, he would have to tear it down, an order to tear it down or pull it out, so that it doesn't affect the other trees. So, sometimes like he'll go into somebody's home. One particular gentleman, he tells me the story, said that his wife had planted that tree and she had passed away recently. And he said, I really pray and hope that you'll never tell me that I have to tear it down. And my father said at that point, he realized if he did have to tell him he asked himself, what would you do? Thankfully, he didn't have to. But I mean, he would have if it was diseased. So it's very, sometimes you kind of have to weigh the benefits and the sacrifice of
And you see the value in a different light. That's an interesting comparison.
exactly.
That's something I
It
didn't know
is, yeah,
about, but
and also one of my coworkers told me she also read this book. I got a couple of
great.
coworkers onto the book. She told me that her grandfather worked the dams in Land
Okay.
Between the Lakes, and she said, he was, just an uneducated man, got the opportunity to work for the Army Corps and build these and be able to feed his large family, and it provided such a great opportunity for him. But at the same time, it's like there's a lot of people that were harmed by it.
Yes, and those benefits were great to Western Kentucky. The number of jobs created, the fact that, there was year-round navigation to the inland waterways, electrification, all those are really important and really helped bring up Western Kentucky because of, a solid economic base, which improved schools and, just the way of life. But again, it's not to say that those decisions were wrong at all. I certainly wouldn't want anyone to think that. But, just the acknowledgement of sacrifice, I think is really important for us to all do as humans to step into other people's shoes.
Definitely. No, this book is definitely not to say wrong or right. It's just a matter of fact.
Good. I hope it comes across like that because, yeah.
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah, definitely. You see I guess the human factors of each event. I think it kind of it helps put things into perspective and helps you understand what's going on currently in our country. Most definitely, yeah. Your connection to your own hometown. How does that influence your writing? Do you sometimes like to go visit your hometown when you're writing, or
Well, and I do. I do. And my hometown is not on the lakes. It's on the Ohio and Tennessee rivers. So it's very much a place of rivers and water. But I think growing up there, in some ways, because all of this was done either before I was born or when I was a really young child. So I didn't really have the knowledge as an adult to figure out, the loss and the sacrifice. I just, again, like Margaret, in some ways, I was a beneficiary of this place and growing up in a place that has these opportunities to be outdoors, to have all this access to this beautiful landscape. And I think that's had played a huge role in my writing, because I think I try to note the environmental side of any story, of any place, the landscape, nature are all very important in my writing. And home is very important in my writing, I think, as it is in my life.
yes, it's home has become important for a lot of
Exactly.
us, during this hard time, and as we reconnect to our home,
Yes.
not just the walls of our home, but
The refuge, the shelter, and during the last 2 years, we have certainly felt that with the pandemic of having a safe place, and that's what is so heartbreaking about these tornadoes that have hit Western Kentucky, because so many people are now without a home, or such a significantly damaged home, that it's gonna be a long time before that returns to normal, and I just really feel for them.
yeah, it's very hard watching what's going on over there on the news, and you kind of hope that they're able to, come out of it stronger and better, and
Right. So much loss, just so much loss. And that's one of the things I wanted to tell in my book is that, there are many different kinds of loss in the book, on the personal level, on the level of place and home. And I guess the ability to keep going, to see the transformation, the change that comes with loss. I think it's an important part of life. But I think that the thing I've noticed in the last 10 days after the tornadoes is the response. And I think the rest of the country feels so strong, and has offered up some amazing support to Western Kentucky, and that is greatly appreciated. As well as the state and federal government have stepped in to do what governments are supposed to do, which is to help people in these kinds of circumstances.
yes, yes, and that's what kind of eases the pain of watching this is definitely the people that have been so supportive to fellow Kentuckians, and it's really, really heartwarming.
And so willing to be there and so willing to give. And that is, of all the things you know, that you'd want in response to this kind of event, you know, they're showing up in some beautiful ways.
That is a beautiful thing to see. So Silas House, the great
Yes.
Silas House, worked with you
Yes.
on this project. What was it like working with him? He seems like a wonderful human being in general, but just a fantastic
He
author. And
is.
yeah,
He is.
yeah.
That's you've kind of summed him up the same way I would sum him up. It was pretty much a dream come true as a writer to have someone like Silas who writes so well about this part of the world and about the people who live here. And he writes in such a genuine way about people that, and in a very respectful, authentic kind of way. People have, their good sides, bad sides, all sides. So I think authentic writing is really important. So Silas is the new editor of Fireside Industries, which is an imprint of the University of Kentucky, University Press of Kentucky, and in partnership with the Heinemann Settlement School, which has a long tradition of literary accomplishment and standards from James Still and Gurney Norman and George Ella Lyon and Silas House. There's a great tradition there. So Silas is the new editor. He selected my book for publication and recommended it to the press. And so it's just been a wonderful experience working with him. I can't think of a better editor for a Kentucky book of fiction.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. And thank you to Silas House for choosing
Thank you.
for choosing this book to be published. It has been a treat for us and for me particularly, for a lot of my coworkers that were reading this
Oh,
book along with
great.
me.
Thank you. That is so appreciated.
What are you working on currently? Do you have any projects coming up, or are you taking a
Well, I
break?
have been doing a lot as far as the book launch. It came out in October 26th. So I've been pretty busy with that and in all the best ways. I am working on a couple of things, but I'm also starting, I think a sequel may be in the works. So I am starting to work on some stories with some of these same characters and giving them an extended.
Oh, okay. So they haven't let go of you, these characters, Cam and Margaret and
No, they haven't. They haven't, and the place hasn't either. But I'm also working on another book. I think it may be a novella, and it's a set in an assisted living facility that is shut down because of the pandemic. So I've been working on that too.
well, something for us to look
Yeah,
forward
I hope
to,
so. Thank
hopefully.
you.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Jayne, for talking to us. We always hope that you get to join us in person sometime.
I would love to. I love the library system here. We have such a wonderful system, and I love libraries. They've been very important in my life and in my life as a reader and as a writer. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, we're here for you if you need any help with your research, we are glad to help.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
It's always good to talk to you. Take
Thank you
care.
very much for the opportunity.
Good.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care. Thank you to Jayne Moore Waldrop for being our guest. Drowned Town is published by Fireside Industries in collaboration with the University Press of Kentucky. A special thank you to our listeners. Drowned Town is currently available for checkout at the Lexington Public Library and for purchase at your local bookstore or online. Thanks for listening to Tales from the Kentucky Room, a podcast brought to you by the Central Library's Kentucky Room staff at the Lexington Public Library. If you enjoyed listening, please take a minute to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. If you have any questions about local history or genealogy research, you can visit us in the Kentucky Room to use our collection and newspaper microfilm, or you can email us at elibrarian@lexpublib.org. That's elibrarian@lexpublib.org. I'm Mariam, and we'll be back with another trip down Lexington's memory lane.